Throughout history, many foes have faced off with the Caped Crusader. Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy, Bane.
And that's just Batman and Robin.
But undoubtedly the most iconic Batman villain, and perhaps the most iconic of all villains, is the Joker. The Joker was first introduced in the first standalone Batman comic in 1940. The character's trajectory throughout the next 80 years in film can show us how our perceptions of villains are evolving. While we will mention the Joker in the 1966 Batman film and the 2019 experiment, we'll be primarily focused on Jack Nicholson's Joker in the 1989 Tim Burton Batman and Heath Ledger's Oscar-winning portrayal in The Dark Knight.
We'll be discussing both films as a whole, so I'm going to put out a little bit of a spoiler warning. But come, laugh to death with me here in the Cinema Circle.
Jack Nicholson's Joker has a much darker edge than the previous incarnations seen on screen. Cesar Romero's Joker from the 1960s was nearly whimsical. He delighted in playing pranks and was very much a clown in the traditional sense of the word.
Burton's 1989 Batman works as an origin story for the Joker. We see him first as a gangster and a crime boss in Gotham, though we know that he's not quite the top of the ranks, and we later learn that he is, of course, the murderer of Bruce Wayne's parents. Beyond that, though, we don't really get a lot of inclination of his backstory.
At first, we're introduced to a man who loves power, money, and women, presumably in that order. Nicholson's Joker takes a turn when he's set up by a fellow gangster for his lusts. There, Batman intervenes and inadvertently causes the Joker's creation. He drops the crime lord into a vat of toxic chemicals which render the Joker pale, while a blow to the face also resulted in a plastic surgery smile glued to his face.
It feels a little out there to call Tim Burton's Batman an allegory of a Cold War turned hot, but the more I examined it, the more I started to buy into that idea.
Batman and Joker are two of the most wealthy and powerful people in Gotham. They clash not for the good of the common people, who they hardly come into contact with, but because each of them is ideologically opposed to the other. Batman offers no alternatives to criminals mugging families to make ends meet. He simply says, "Stop doing crimes," usually speaking with his fists. This mirrors the US's policies regarding socioeconomic injustice in the 1980s. Instead of cutting to the root of the issue, Batman is ideologically set on stopping quote-unquote crime, as he believes it will help the greater good. Joker, meanwhile, is a clown version of the American idea of a Soviet communist. Instead of partaking in capitalism, he spreads the wealth, freely giving money to the citizens of Gotham, because it doesn't mean anything to him. But then he also tries to gas the people that he's given the money to, as he's ultimately seen as lawless.
Again, I am in no way advocating that this is a correct depiction of the USSR. I don't think it's an accurate portrayal in any way. I do think that it is perhaps how America viewed the USSR, sort of a caricature. I think that it's also just only in retrospect that we can see that Batman isn't quite the hero that he thinks he is either.
The film frequently asks the people of Gotham to decide which of the men is really the villain. At the center of the conflict is also what we see at the center of the Cold War: resources. In this case, the resource is Vicky Vale. Vale doesn't represent a resource that either of the men need, however. Both Batman and Joker live well above their means, and presumably could have any women that they want. However, she is a resource that they both want. She becomes the Helen of Troy that causes the men to wage war while being given little to do herself in the movie.
I was struck a little bit by how little dimension Batman has in this movie.
The film is undoubtedly his. We start and end with him, and the action revolves around his choices. However, the greatest change of the movie in terms of character arc is without question the Joker's. Not only does he undergo a physical change and a conversion from bad to actually evil, he also evolves in his desires and purpose. Joker here is set on revenge more than any particular ideology.
While many incarnations of the Joker seem to be agents of pure chaos, Ledger's Joker seems to me to be an exception, though maybe he's the exception that proves the rule.
Everything we see Joker do in The Dark Knight is methodical and carefully executed. His decisions aren't spur of the moment or random. He is calculated, but his calculation is set on evil purposes, so we as an audience don't want to sympathize with him enough to see the careful planning that must have gone into his many schemes. The Dark Knight's Joker is nihilistic, embodying a certain general feeling in a post-9/11 world and simultaneously painting society's villains as amoral forces of evil. Joker does make a number of valid points throughout the movie, and in some ways his nihilism does come across as more genuine than Batman's stoic morals.
While Burton's Joker was out for revenge, Nicholson's Joker is out to prove that everyone is corruptible.
He proves this most obviously with Harvey Dent, who he toys with and pushes over the edge of madness. But even Dent seems to be a means to a different end, breaking Batman's moral compass. At the end of the movie, we see just that. Batman, who had gone out of his way to save the Joker from a fatal fall in the previous scene, allows Harvey Dent to fall to his death in order to save Commissioner Gordon's son.
While you could argue that Batman is still morally right for the choice he made, the choice exists sort of as an extension of the boat metaphor from the section previous in the movie. Who is worth saving? Who has the right to choose that? Batman makes his choice, and in doing so, proves the Joker right.
Where it may be a stretch to call Tim Burton's Batman an allegory for the Cold War, many more have interpreted the Dark Knight's imagery and use of surveillance to connect it to the post-9/11 war on terror. To read the film this way, Batman's ultimate corruption is a stand-in for the tough decisions the US and other Western powers had to make in the face of terrorism. Harvey Dent, the city's foremost seeker of good turned evil, furthers this idea, showing how even the greatest forces of good can turn to sinister tactics when provoked.
Perhaps then, the killing of Rachel by the Joker represents the 9/11 attacks themselves. A tragic event spiraling good men to madness.
However, the end of the film backpedals on this a bit. It paints Dent in a positive light, having Batman take the blame for his murders and pitting him as the next target for public outcry. This ending speaks both to America's need for a scapegoat throughout the aughts, as well as stating the filmmaker's final thesis. Yes, everyone is corruptible, but the fact that we might do something bad shouldn't stop us from doing good.
The Joker's nihilism is tempting. Acting without consequences would be liberating to many of us.
But the film asks us to recognize that while Joker may be right about all being corruptible, we must still work within moral and ethical codes in order for society to exist and for there to be hope. In 1989 Batman, Joker is positioned as the murderer of Bruce Wayne's parents and therefore creator of Batman. Batman, by pushing Joker into the vat of chemicals, creates his most hated foe. In The Dark Knight, the Joker is given no backstory. While we see the origin of Batman in Batman Begins, The Dark Knight sets them as almost eternal opposing forces.
While we get a sense of who Nicholson's Joker is and where he comes from, we don't get that sense from Ledger's Joker. The closest we get to a backstory from him is his famous "Do you want to know how I got these scars?" monologues.
He tells two completely different stories, so we really can't believe either of them.
Though it is clear he hates his father.
While 1989's Batman is a story of Joker's descent, The Dark Knight is the story of Batman's descent at the hands of the Joker. Audiences of the Cold War era were well versed in how two opposing forces could beat against each other and muddy the waters of who was right. 2008 audiences instead had to watch as a war was waged under less than sterling pretenses. They saw how people they perceived to be mad terrorists like the Joker could lead people they respected to commit atrocities, not unlike those that had originated the conflict. In both films, Joker is essentially a loner. He laughs away the pain festering within him. He makes sharp jokes and grandiose gestures of force. Both Jokers act sort of like cult leaders to garner new followers. They prey on the weak and ill people in need do their bidding. Neither seems to have any sense of compassion, and their deepest connection seems to be with Batman.
While I want to keep this conversation mostly tied to these two films, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the movie that I think best explores Batman and Joker's relationship, the Lego Batman movie.
This movie, better than any other, explores the pair as soulmates, two sides of the same coin. Batman needs villains like Joker in order to be a hero, and Joker needs Batman's antagonism and attention. If you skip this movie because it seemed like a cash grab from both of the two franchises, I encourage you to give it a watch. I'd never hear the end of it in the comments section if I didn't include mention of 2019's Joker. However, in my opinion, the film doesn't add meaningfully to this discussion. Perhaps a topic for a different video, but I think it leads too heavily into The King of Comedy and Taxi Driver as inspirations, and if I wanted to watch either of those two movies, I would just go watch them. Where I think Joker contributes to our conversation is in how we're asked to sympathize with him.
Todd Phillips' Joker is full anti-hero, an archetype that we've seen throughout the history of literature in some capacity, but one that's really permeated the culture in recent years.
Breaking Bad, Maleficent, and more recently Cruella ask audiences to see the villain's point of view. It's fed into the culture's growing desire to get inside the mind of the sick and twisted. Instead of just rooting for the bad guy as you might in a Friday the 13th movie, you see the character's backstory and are asked to sympathize with them.
This is a departure from the previous appearances of the Joker on the big screen. In 1989's Batman, he gets a bit of a backstory, and it's made clear that there was at least a possibility of redemption.
The Dark Knight paints Joker as a force that always has and always will exist. These approaches to the character speak to me more, as they allow me to fill in the blanks and allow me to find discomfort with the ideals of a psychopath instead of Phillips's approach of comforting me that the Joker and I are not so different. Which Joker do you find the most unnerving? What do you think these movies are trying to say by including them? Leave a comment down below and let me know. If you'd like more movie and comedy content, follow me or the channel on Twitter or Instagram. Thank you so much for watching and for loving movies. If you've liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more introspection on cinema. You can also share this video with a friend or consider supporting me on Patreon, the link in the description. Thanks so much again. Be safe. Watch a movie.